At Christmas morning, my father looked at me with cold eyes and said, "You don't deserve presents this year." The room fell silent. I nodded calmly and replied, "Then I guess you won't need this anymore." I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and canceled the automatic mortgage payment I'd been covering for them. When he saw the confirmation on my screen, his face turned ashen. The scent of pine and cinnamon should have brought comfort and nostalgia. But this year, walking into my childhood home in Portland. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Oregon felt like stepping into quicksand. Every string of twinkling lights, every carefully placed ornament on the tree seemed to mock the idea of family warmth. I stood in the living room, watching steam rise from my untouched coffee, feeling the weight of expectations pressing down on me like a physical force. I'm Elena Reyes, 32 years old, and I work as an environmental engineer in Chicago. I've built a stable career after graduating with honors, designing water conservation systems for urban developments. It's meaningful work that makes a difference. In people's lives, work that my family has always subtly dismissed as interesting, with that particular tone that suggested it wasn't quite what they had hoped for. The Reyes family has always valued status above substance. My parents, my father, Michael, a surgeon, and my mother, Diane, who runs a successful real estate agency, built their lives around the acquisition of prestige, the right neighborhoods, the right schools, the right connections. Everything calculated to project an image of success that matched their exacting standards. Growing up as the eldest daughter, I learned early that love in our household came with conditions. Straight A's earned a nod of approval. Second place in competitions earned concerned talks about applying yourself. Choosing environmental engineering over medicine or law resulted in weeks of tense silence, followed by years of subtle digs about wasted potential. I was the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts, who listened to my father's lengthy monologues about family legacy without arguing, who absorbed my mother's pointed criticisms about everything from my career to my appearance with a placating smile. I was the one who, fresh out of graduate school with student loans looming, drained my savings account nearly $35,000 to help them when their investment in a medical startup faltered. Just until things stabilized, Dad had said. That money vanished into their accounts, never to be mentioned again, except as a contribution to family prosperity. I was the one who spent every vacation for 2 years helping renovate their vacation cabin in Michigan, sanding floors, painting walls, landscaping the grounds. My back ached for days afterward, but the promised investment in our shared future never materialized beyond vague references to family assets. I did these things because deep down, I believed in the concept of family that they preached to others. The supportive unit that celebrated each other's unique paths and contributions. I clung to glimpses of genuine connection that occasionally broke through their carefully maintained facade, convinced that somewhere beneath the performance was the loving family I desperately wanted. Those moments of hope kept me tethered to a cycle of giving that only intensified as years passed. There was the co-signing of a loan for my younger brother Daniel's business venture, a guaranteed success that collapsed within months, leaving my credit score in shambles. There were the expected financial gifts for birthdays and holidays that felt more like tribute payments, accompanied by subtle calculations of whether I'd given enough. The expectations extended beyond money. I was expected to attend every family function regardless of my work commitments or personal needs. Missing my cousin's engagement party due to an emergency project deadline resulted in weeks of passive-aggressive comments about priorities and family loyalty. My mother perfected the art of the guilt trip, her voice softening with practiced concern whenever she wanted something. "We hardly see you anymore, Alina. Is your job really keeping you that busy? Or your brother manages to visit twice a month? And he has 3 children." Each comment delivered with wide, innocent eyes that dared me to challenge the underlying accusation of selfishness. My father preferred direct pronouncements, his deep voice brooking no argument. "The family needs your expertise on this investment decision," he would state, as if my inclusion was a favor rather than another opportunity to extract value from me. His favorite phrase, "This is what successful families douche down any hesitation," or a boundary I attempted to establish. The physical toll of constantly navigating their expectations manifested in chronic migraines, tension that knotted my shoulders into painful knots, and insomnia that left me staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., rehearsing conversations and calculating responses that might finally earn their approval without completely depleting me. The most recent demand had come 3 months ago. The mortgage on their vacation property had increased, and they needed a bridge until some investments matured. I agreed to cover the monthly payments temporarily, already the third such temporary arrangement that had somehow become permanent. Setting up the automatic payment from my account felt like watching another piece of my independence float away, but I justified it as helping family through a rough patch. Last month, while having dinner with my friend Tasha, I found myself once again venting about my parents' latest manipulation. A series of hints about contributing to a family fund for a luxury cruise to celebrate their anniversary. Tasha listened patiently, then set down her fork and looked at me with unusual intensity. "Alina, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear it. This isn't normal family dynamics. This is financial abuse. This is emotional manipulation, and you deserve so much better." Her words struck me like a physical blow. Abuse, manipulation. The terms seemed too harsh, too dramatic for what I'd always framed as complicated family dynamics or high expectations. But something in her directness cut through years of rationalization and minimizing. Think about it. Do you ever treat someone you love the way they treat you? Would you continuously take from someone while dismissing their needs and worth? I couldn't answer, as the question hung between us, uncomfortable and impossible to dismiss. That night, I barely slept, Tasha's words echoing in my mind. The next day, I made an appointment with a therapist specializing in family dynamics. Dr. Martinez listened to my stories without judgment, then helped me identify patterns I'd been too close to see clearly. "What you're describing," she explained carefully, "is a relationship built on conditional love and financial exploitation. Your family has created a dynamic where your worth is measured by what you can provide, not who you are." Over the following weeks, I began reading about emotional manipulation, financial abuse, and healthy boundaries. Each article and book seemed to describe my family with unsettling accuracy. I joined an online support group for adult children of manipulative parents, finding strange comfort in the similar stories shared by others. I began to recognize how deeply I'd internalized messages about my inadequacy, how thoroughly I'd accepted the idea that I needed to continually prove my worth through sacrifice. I started seeing how strategically my parents deployed approval and disappointment to maintain control. The annual Christmas gathering invitation arrived by mail in early December, an elaborate card featuring a professional photo of my parents' and brother's family, with a handwritten note about cherished family tradition. Reading it, I felt the familiar mixture of dread and obligation. This time, something else stirred beneath a quiet determination that this year would be different. I consulted with Dr. Martinez about establishing boundaries, about communicating my needs clearly without expecting my family to suddenly transform. I also made an appointment with a financial advisor, Leela Khan, who helped me review my financial entanglements with my family and develop a strategy for disentangling them. This isn't just about money, it's about reclaiming your financial autonomy and recognizing your right to prioritize your own security. With her guidance, I compiled documentation of every transaction, every contribution, every loan. The mounting evidence of financial exploitation was undeniable, tens of thousands of dollars over the years, most given under emotional pressure or with promises of repayment that never materialized. But it was another discovery that truly solidified my resolve. While organizing my records, I found the original agreement for the vacation property, which I'd co-signed years ago. Reading the fine print, I realized that despite contributing significantly to both the down payment and ongoing mortgage, my name had been removed from the deed in an amendment I had no memory of signing. My signature was there, but the date coincided with a period when I'd been signing multiple documents for a family trust my father had insisted needed immediate attention. The betrayal cut deep. This wasn't negligence or misunderstanding. This was deliberate deception designed to extract financial support while denying me ownership rights. I took the documents to a real estate attorney, Marcos Diaz, who confirmed my suspicions and outlined my legal options. "You have grounds for legal action," he explained. "But before we go that route, I recommend documenting everything you're preparing. For a direct conversation, sometimes the threat of legal consequences is enough to prompt resolution." I decided to attend the Christmas gathering not with resignation or false cheerfulness, but with clear-eyed purpose. This would be the moment I reclaimed my narrative and established unambiguous boundaries. I prepared carefully in the days leading up to Christmas. I organized all my financial records, made copies of the altered property deed, and documented the monthly mortgage payments I'd been making. I wrote out what I wanted to say, practicing with Dr. Martinez to ensure I could communicate clearly, even if emotions ran high. The night before Christmas, I barely slept, anxiety and determination warring within me. By morning, a strange calm had settled over me, the calm that comes with absolute certainty about the path forward. I arrived at my parents' suburban home early on Christmas morning. The two-story colonial was impeccably decorated as always. Professional lighting outlining the roof and windows, a designer wreath on the door. Inside, the 12-foot tree was perfect in its color-coordinated ornaments and twinkling lights. Presents were arranged artfully beneath it all, except mine. I noticed immediately. My brother Daniel, his wife Jessica, and their 3 children were already there. The kids playing with new tablets, while the adults sipped mimosas in the kitchen. My mother air-kissed my cheek, immediately commenting on my haircut. "Interesting. Choice, darling." While my father merely nodded from his position at the head of the table. Breakfast was served on the fine china reserved for special occasions. Conversation revolving around Daniel's recent promotion and the children's achievements. I participated minimally, observing the familiar dynamics with new awareness. How? My mother steered attention toward Daniel. How my father delivered opinions as indisputable facts. How my contributions to conversation were subtly diminished or redirected. After breakfast, it was time for the traditional opening of presents. My nieces and nephews tore into elaborately wrapped packages, exclaiming over expensive toys and electronics. Daniel and Jessica received matching luxury watches. Then my father stood, commanding the room's attention with practiced authority. "Before we continue," he announced, his voice carrying that familiar note of judgment, "we need to address something." He turned to me, his expression stern. "Lena, your mother and I have been discussing your recent reluctance to fully participate in family obligations." My mother nodded, her face a mask of rehearsed concern. "We've noticed you pulling away, dear. Missing important events, questioning family decisions. We've always taught you that family comes first. We support each other unquestioningly, but lately you've been difficult." Gestured toward the tree, where no gifts remained. "So we decided that until you recommit to family values, you don't deserve presents this year." The room fell silent. My nieces and nephews stopped playing with their gifts, looking up with wide eyes. Daniel and Jessica exchanged uncomfortable glances but remained silent, complicit in their silence. In the past, this moment would have devastated me. I would have apologized, promised to do better, accepted their judgment as valid. But today I felt only a strange clarity, as if seeing through a previously fogged window. I smiled calmly. "I understand completely," I said, my voice steady. "I've come to a similar conclusion." Pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and navigated to the recurring payments section. I turned the screen toward my father so he could see exactly what I was doing. "Since you feel I'm not meeting family obligations, I assume you won't need this anymore," I said, and canceled the $2,400 monthly mortgage payment I'd been making on their vacation property. The confirmation appeared instantly, my father's face drained of color as he registered what had happened. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat in theatrical shock. "You can't do that," my father sputtered, his authority crumbling. "We're counting on that payment. Just like I counted on being treated with respect and honesty?" I asked, still calm. "Just like I counted on my name remaining on the property deed that I helped pay for?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder containing copies of all my documentation, the altered deed. Bank statements showing years of financial contributions, a formal letter from Attorney Diaz outlining my legal position. I've given this family over $150,000 in the past decade, I said, laying out the documents on the coffee table. Money for investments that disappeared, loans that were never repaid, contributions to properties I supposedly coned until my name mysteriously vanished from legal documents. My mother began to protest, but I continued, my voice clear and unwavering. I'm not asking for all of it back. I'm simply reclaiming my financial autonomy starting today. The monthly payments stop now. The emotional manipulation stops now. Conditional love stops now. I looked around at their shocked faces, feeling a strange mixture of grief and liberation. I spent my adult life trying to earn your approval through sacrifice. I'm done measuring my worth by your impossible standards. This is absurd, my father exploded, his face flushing with anger. After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me? I asked quietly, besides teaching me that love comes with conditions, that family means extraction rather than support. My brother finally spoke, his voice tight with discomfort. Elena, you're overreacting. Family helps family. That's all this has ever been. I turned to him. Is that why your failed business venture was family helping family? But my career is just playing with water systems? Is that why your children get Christmas presents, but I get a public shaming? The room fell silent again. My youngest niece looked confused, her small voice breaking the tension. Why doesn't Aunt Elena get presents? Out of the mouths of babes. The innocent question hung in the air, exposing the cruelty of the situation more effectively than any argument could have. I knelt down to her level. Sometimes, sweetheart, the best gift is realizing your own worth. I smiled at her, then stood to face my family once more. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I said clearly. I'm establishing boundaries, reclaiming my financial independence. And I'm offering a different kind of relationship. One based on mutual respect, rather than obligation and exploitation. I gathered my belongings, suddenly eager for fresh air, for distance, for the beginning of whatever came next. At the door, I turned back one last time. Merry Christmas, I said softly. Hope someday we can build something authentic together. The choice is yours. I walked out into the crisp winter morning, each step feeling lighter than the last. My phone immediately began vibrating with texts and calls, but I silenced it, allowing myself the gift of peace, of boundaries, of the first truly honest Christmas in years. Driving away from my parents' house, I felt a mixture of liberation and grief washing over me. The snow-covered streets of Portland blurred through my tears, but they weren't tears of regret. They were the necessary release of emotions I'd bottled up for years. I pulled over at a small park, the same one where I'd played as a child, and watched families building snowmen and sledding down gentle slopes. Normal families sharing joy without scorecards or conditions. My phone continued buzzing, with notifications, 14 missed calls, and 23 text messages in the hour since I'd left. I finally looked at the texts, scrolling through a predictable progression for my father's angry demands. Come back immediately and fix this. To my mother's emotional manipulation, how could you humiliate us like this? We're devastated. To Daniel's attempted mediation, you've gone too far. Let's talk about this reasonably. None of them acknowledged the truth of what had happened. None contained the words, "I'm sorry," or showed any recognition of the pattern I'd exposed. It was as if they were reading from a script I'd finally stepped away from, continuing their lines even though I'd exited the stage. I silenced my phone and drove to Tasha's apartment, opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a fierce hug. "You did it," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Those simple words, the acknowledgement of my courage, the validation of my worth, broke something open inside me. I sobbed in her arms, releasing years of pent-up pain and disappointment. She led me to her couch, made hot chocolate with the tiny marshmallows I loved, and listened as I recounted the morning's confrontation. "It feels both terrible and wonderful," I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "It's like I've lost something precious, gained something essential." "You haven't lost a family," Tasha said gently. "You've lost the illusion of one. There's a difference." Her words resonated deeply. I had been clinging to a mirage, a performance of family rather than the real thing. the real thing wasn't perfect now. Family is but. It included mutual respect, reciprocal support, and unconditional acceptance. The days after Christmas unfolded with a strange new rhythm. I took a week off work to process what had happened and to establish my new boundaries. I consulted with attorney Diaz again, who advised documenting all contact attempts from my family and avoiding verbal conversations that couldn't be recorded or verified. They're likely in shock right now, he explained during our meeting. People who've maintained control suddenly lose it. They often escalate before they're willing to negotiate or accept change. His prediction proved accurate. My father's approach shifted from angry demands to thinly veiled threats: "You're making a serious mistake that will have lasting consequences." While my mother alternated between wounded victimhood, "I can't believe my own daughter would turn on me like this," in attempts to leverage extended family. "Your Aunt Patricia is so concerned about what's happening." Daniel's strategy was more subtle. He sent carefully crafted messages appealing to my sense of responsibility. "Mom's having anxiety attacks over this, and Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. Is this really worth risking his health?" When those didn't work, I tried minimizing. "It's just money, Alina. Is it really worth destroying our family over?" "Just money." The phrase stuck with me. It'd never been just money when they needed it from me. Then, it had been family obligation, shared investment, your fair contribution. The double standard was so clear now that I couldn't believe I'd ever missed it. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my financial security. I met with Leela Khan again to create a comprehensive plan for recovery. Calculated that between direct gifts, unpaid loans, contributions to family properties, I'd given my parents and brother nearly $180,000 over 8 years, money that could have gone toward my own home, retirement, or even just security and peace of mind. "The financial damage is significant," Leela acknowledged as we reviewed spreadsheets in her office, "but recoverable. The most important thing now is preventing further drain and establishing healthy financial boundaries." We created a detailed budget that prioritized building my emergency fund and retirement savings. I canceled joint credit cards, removed myself as an authorized user on family accounts, and placed a freeze on my credit to prevent any new accounts being opened in my name without my knowledge or precaution, Leela insisted, was necessary given my family's history of financial entanglement. "Financial boundaries are just as important as emotional ones," she reminded me. "They often go hand in hand." The financial reorganization was straightforward compared to the emotional work. In my twice-weekly sessions with Dr. Martinez, I began the painful process of examining how deeply my self-worth had become tied to my family's approval and how thoroughly I'd internalized their judgments. "You're grieving," Dr. Martinez explained during one particularly difficult session. "Not just the family you thought you had, but the one you deserved and never received. That grief is valid and necessary." She helped me identify the negative messages I'd internalized: that I was never quite good enough, that my value was tied to what I could provide, that setting boundaries was selfish. Together, we worked on replacing these toxic beliefs with healthier ones: that I had inherent worth regardless of achievement or service, that genuine love didn't come with invoices attached, that caring for myself wasn't selfish, but necessary. My support network expanded beyond Tasha and my professional advisors. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during years of prioritizing family demands. I joined a support group for adult children of emotionally manipulative parents. Finding both validation and strategies from others on similar journeys. In one memorable group session, a woman in her 50s shared how she'd spent decades trying to earn her mother's approval through financial support, only to discover after her mother's death that she'd been written out of the will entirely. "I gave her my retirement," she said, her voice breaking. "And in the end, she still didn't think I deserved anything in return." Her story hit me hard, offering a glimpse of what my future might have looked like had I continued down the same path. It strengthened my resolve to maintain the boundaries I'd established, despite the ongoing pressure from my family. That pressure took new forms as weeks passed. When direct appeals and threats didn't work, they enlisted Flying Monkey's relatives and family friends who reached out with concern, often having heard heavily edited versions of the situation. My father's sister called, her voice tight with disapproval. Your parents have done everything for you, Alina. This is how you repay them, by abandoning them financially when they need you? My godmother sent a long email detailing how heartbroken my mother was, how she cried daily over my betrayal, how this wasn't how I was raised to behave. Each time, I responded with calm, brief explanations. I'm not abandoning my family. I'm establishing healthy boundaries after years of financial exploitation. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship on more equal terms. Most weren't interested in my perspective. They had accepted my parents' narrative without question, just as I once had. Her disapproval stung, but less than it would have months. Earlier, I was developing what Dr. Martinez called an internal validation system. It didn't require external approval to maintain my sense of worth. The most difficult call came from my grandmother, my father's mother, whose opinion I'd always valued, like the others. She asked questions and actually listened to my answers. After I explained the situation, the removed deed, the unpaid loans, the years of manipulation, there was a long silence. I didn't know, she finally said, her voice heavy with something I couldn't quite identify. Michael always said you were helping because you wanted to, because you were doing well. I wanted to help, I acknowledged. But there's a difference between freely given help and coerced sacrifice. Another long pause. There might be things you don't know, Alina, she said carefully. Things about your father's childhood, about how he was raised. That conversation opened an unexpected door. Over the next few weeks, my grandmother shared stories I'd never heard about my grandfather's harsh parenting, about financial struggles, carefully hidden behind a facade of success, about my father's desperate need for approval that was never satisfied. It doesn't excuse what he's done, she said firmly during one of our talks. But sometimes understanding the source of broken patterns can help us avoid repeating them. Her insights didn't magically heal the rift with my parents, but they added complexity to my understanding. My father hadn't invented these toxic patterns. He'd inherited them and passed them down to me. The realization was both painful and oddly liberating. This wasn't about my worth or even specifically about me. It was about generational trauma repeating itself until someone chose to break the cycle. I was choosing to break it. 6 weeks. After Christmas, the expected legal escalation began. I received a formal letter from my parents' attorney claiming that the mortgage payments constituted a gift rather than a contribution toward ownership and demanding immediate resumption of payments to avoid legal action. Attorney Diaz responded with our evidence C-mails referring to the payments as my investment in the property. Bank records showing my contribution to the down payment. Most damning, the altered deed with my suspiciously dated signature. They're overplaying their hand, Diaz told me, as we reviewed their letter in his office. They're hoping you'll cave under legal pressure, but they have to know their position is weak. Within days, their attorney proposed mediation rather than litigation, a significant retreat from their initial aggressive stance. We agreed, setting conditions that included full financial disclosure and neutral territory for the meeting. Night before the scheduled mediation, I received an unexpected text from Daniel. Can we meet? Just you and me? No, Mom and Dad. Please. Against Diaz's advice, but following my instinct, I agreed to coffee at a public place near my apartment. Daniel arrived looking uncharacteristically disheveled. The confident facade cracked to reveal something vulnerable beneath. They're falling apart, he said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from me. Dad can't sleep. Mom's on anxiety medication. The vacation property's going into foreclosure unless they can find another way to cover the mortgage. I sipped my coffee, waiting for the familiar guilt to surface. The automatic response of rushing to fix their problems. It didn't come. That sounds difficult, I said neutrally. But their financial problems aren't my responsibility. Daniel stared at me as if I'd started speaking another language. But we're family, he said, emphasizing the word as if it were a magical incantation that could override all other considerations. Yes, we are, I agreed, which is why I spent years helping financially, only to have my name removed from property I partially owned and to be told I didn't deserve presents, because I finally questioned the arrangement. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was harsh, he admitted, but you know how Dad gets when he feels challenged. You could have talked to them privately instead of making a scene. I tried private conversations for years, Daniel. They didn't work. I didn't make a sin, I responded to one they created. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. What do you want? To punish them? To see them lose everything? The question revealed so much about how differently we viewed the situation. In his mind, and probably in our parents', my boundary setting was punitive, a revenge tactic rather than self-protection. I don't want to punish anyone, I said carefully. I want acknowledgement of what happened. I want appropriate compensation for my contributions, and I want a relationship based on mutual respect going forward if that's possible. Daniel looked skeptical. You know, they'll never admit they did anything wrong. His candid assessment of our parents' inability to take responsibility was telling. He saw their flaws clearly. He just chose to accommodate them rather than challenge them. Then we'll remain at an impasse, I said simply. He studied me for a long moment. You've changed, he finally said. Stopped accepting the unacceptable. I corrected. There's a difference. As we parted, he hesitated, then said something that stayed with me. I always thought you were the lucky one. Getting out, building your own life while I stayed in their orbit, following the script. It was the first glimpse I'd had that my brother might be trapped in his own version of the dynamic. I'd escaped playing the role of the good son at the cost of his autonomy. I wondered what price he'd paid for his apparent favorite status. What compromises he'd made to maintain it. The mediation itself was tense, but productive. My parents arrived with their attorney, their expressions a mixture of indignation and discomfort at seeing me across the table in a professional context rather than a family one. My father initially tried to control the narrative, interrupting and dismissing points raised by Diaz until the mediator firmly established ground rules. The financial evidence was irrefutable. When presented with the documented history of my contributions, their defense shifted from denial she gave those funds willingly, without expectation of repayment, to justification were her parents. Supporting us is natural to minimizing the amounts aren't as significant as she's claiming. None of these arguments held up under scrutiny. By the session's midpoint, their attorney was whispering urgently to them, likely advising compromise. Rather than continued resistance, the turning point came when Diaz presented the altered deed. My mother's face flushed with what looked like genuine surprise as she examined it, while my father's expression hardened into something defensive and cornered. Perhaps the mediator suggested carefully, this is a moment to consider what resolution might look like for all parties. What followed was hours of negotiation, resulting in a settlement that addressed the financial aspects without fully resolving the emotional breach. They would sell the vacation property and return my documented contributions plus interest. Other unpaid loans would be formally acknowledged and repayment structured over time. Most importantly, I would have no further financial obligations. To them, explicit or implied. As we concluded, my father spoke directly to me for the first time that day. Is this what you wanted? To humiliate us? To break apart the family? The familiar accusation no longer had power over me. What I wanted, I replied evenly, was to be valued for who I am, not what I could provide. What I wanted was a family that functioned on love rather than obligation and control. I still want that, if it's ever possible. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but whether from genuine remorse or strategic emotional display, I couldn't tell. We've always loved you, she insisted. In your way, perhaps, I acknowledge. Love shouldn't leave you feeling constantly inadequate and depleted. We parted without resolution of the deeper issues, but with a clear framework for the financial disentanglement. It wasn't the full reconciliation part of me still hoped for, but it was a necessary first step toward whatever came next. As spring arrived, bringing renewal to the landscape, I felt my own internal renewal taking root. The financial settlement had been finalized, removing the practical entanglements that had bound me to toxic patterns. My emergency fund was growing, my retirement accounts recovering, my sense of financial agency strengthening daily. More importantly, my emotional health was flourishing. Constant anxiety that had been my companion for years had receded, placed by a growing confidence in my own perceptions and decisions. I no longer experienced that instinctive clench of dread when my phone rang. I slept through the night more often than not. My chronic headaches had virtually disappeared. These physical improvements aren't coincidental, Dr. Martinez pointed out during one of our sessions. Chronic stress has tangible physical effects. As you've removed the source of that stress, your body is healing alongside your mind. Contact with my family had become minimal but civil. Occasional text exchanges with Daniel, brief, carefully neutral emails with my mother, silence from my father. Wasn't the relationship I'd once desperately wanted, but it was one I could maintain, without sacrificing my well-being. Meanwhile, other relationships blossomed in the space created by establishing boundaries. I reconnected with college friends I'd lost touch with during years of prioritizing family demands. I joined a community garden project, finding unexpected joy in growing things and connecting with neighbors. I started dating again after a long hiatus, approaching relationships with new clarity about healthy dynamics and legitimate expectations. One evening, while having dinner with Tasha and her partner, I received a text from my mother. Your father had a minor heart procedure today. Nothing serious, but thought you should know. The old Alina would have immediately dropped everything, rushed to be at his bedside, taken on coordinating care and managing logistics. The new Alina responded with appropriate concern. Thank you for letting me know. I hope his recovery goes smoothly. Please keep me updated without abandoning my evening or my boundaries. Later, Tasha remarked on the change. 6 months ago, you would have been halfway to Portland before finishing that text. 6 months ago, I was still trying to earn love through sacrifice, I replied. I've learned that real love doesn't require that. 2 months after the mediation settlement, I stood in my Chicago apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I was preparing for a long-awaited career move-up, a position with an international water conservation organization that would take me to projects across the Southwest. The job represented everything I valued: meaningful work, professional growth, and making a tangible difference in communities. Facing water scarcity, my phone chimed with a text from Leela Khan, my financial advisor. Just checked your accounts. Emergency fund target reached. Retirement back on track. Celebration coffee next week. I smiled, feeling a surge of pride and accomplishment. Just 6 months, I'd rebuilt financial stability I'd sacrificed for years to family demands. The settlement money had helped. But more important was stopping the constant drain of resources, both financial and emotional, that had kept me perpetually struggling. As I carefully wrapped framed photos in bubble wrap, I paused at one showing a much younger me with my parents and Daniel at Crater Lake. We were smiling, sunburned and seemingly happy, though I remembered the tension that had simmered beneath. The surface, even then, my father's criticism of the cabin I'd booked, my mother's pointed comments about my hiking clothes, Daniel's smug satisfaction at being praised for organizing the boat tour. I wrapped the photo anyway, not out of nostalgia for a perfect past that never existed, but as a reminder of how far I'd come in recognizing unhealthy patterns and choosing a different path. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery person holding a large envelope. I signed for it, puzzled since I wasn't expecting any packages. The return address made my heart skip. My grandmother's familiar handwriting, but sent from a law office in Portland. Inside was a formal letter from her attorney, along with a handwritten note from my grandmother. I read the note first, my hands trembling slightly. My dearest Alina, by the time you receive this, I will have told your father what I'm doing. I don't imagine he's taking it well. But some truths need to be faced, no matter how uncomfortable. What you did at Christmas was brave, braver than I've ever been. It made me examine my own role in enabling patterns that have hurt our family. For generations, the enclosed documents explain my decision to restructure my estate. I've established a trust for you that cannot be accessed or influenced by your parents. It's not an enormous sum, but it's something I want you to have without conditions or manipulation. Importantly, closing information I should have shared years ago. Your grandfather's business records, correspondences between your father and his siblings, documents relating to family properties and investments. You'll find your situation wasn't unique. This pattern has repeated itself through at least 3 generations of our family. Knowledge is power. Alina, use it wisely. With love and admiration, Grandma Ruth. My hands shook as I opened the legal documents, confirming the establishment of a trust in my name with specific provisions preventing any claims or control by my parents. 8. Was the second thicker envelope that truly captured my attention. Decades of family financial records, meticulously preserved by my grandmother. I spent hours at my kitchen table, sorting through the papers, uncovering a disturbing pattern that stretched back to my grandfather's treatment of his own siblings. Property manipulations, loans never repaid. Financial support extracted through guilt and obligation. Siblings systematically pushed out of family businesses through dubious legal maneuvers. Most revealing were letters between my father and his older sister, my Aunt Evelyn, whom I barely knew. Their correspondence documented a painfully familiar dynamic demands for financial support. Promises of shared ownership, then systematic exclusion once contributions had been secured. Their relationship had ultimately fractured over the family's primary business. With Evelyn essentially forced out after years of contributing capital and labor, it was like reading my own story played out decades earlier, with different names, but identical tactics. I called my grandmother immediately. Her voice sounded tired, but determined when she answered. "I see you received my package," she said without preamble. "Grandma, why didn't you tell me any of this before? About Dad and Aunt Evelyn? About Grandpa's business practices?" She sighed heavily. Shame, primarily. And that insidious belief that family matters stay within the family. I told myself I was protecting everyone, but really, I was just enabling the cycle to continue. A pause. "I'm sorry, Elena. I should have spoken up when I first saw the pattern." Repeating with you, "How did Dad react when you told him about the trust?" "About as well as you'd expect," she said dryly. There were shouting accusations of betrayal, attempts to convince me I was being manipulated by you. When those didn't work, he switched to health concerns, how the stress might affect me, how I wasn't thinking clearly. It was so predictable. It would have been almost comical if it weren't so sad. The same tactics he'd used on me, now deployed against his own mother. "What made you decide to do this now?" I asked. There was a long pause, watching you stand up at Christmas Maid. And you realize how long I've been complicit through my silence. "I'm 83 years old, Alina. If I don't break this pattern now, when will I?" Her words resonated deeply. It took courage to confront decades of enabling behavior, to challenge family mythology at any age, but particularly in her 80s. When the desire for peace and reconciliation often outweighs the pursuit of difficult truths, there's something else you should know, she continued. "I've contacted Evelyn. We've been talking regularly for the first time in nearly 20 years. How is she?" I asked, realizing I knew almost nothing about this aunt who had been effectively erased from our family narrative. "Remarkably well, considering everything. She built a successful life in Arizona after the split with your father. She has children, your cousins, who you've never met. She'd like to know you if you're open." To that, the revelation of family. I'd never known family who had experienced the same toxic patterns and survived felt like discovering a map when I'd been wandering without direction. "I'd like that very much," I said. To a barrage of angry texts from my father, clearly triggered by my grandmother's disclosure. The messages escalated from accusations, "You've poisoned your grandmother," against me, to threats, "This will have serious legal consequences too." Attempts at guilt, "Your grandmother's health is fragile. The stress could kill her." I didn't respond immediately, choosing instead to consult with Attorney Diaz. His advice was straightforward. Your grandmother is of sound mind and has every right to distribute her assets as she sees fit. These threats have no legal basis. Armed with this reassurance, I composed a brief, factual response. Grandma made her own decisions based on patterns she's observed over decades. I respect her right to manage her assets according to her wishes, just as I respect your right to manage yours. I hope we can find a way forward that acknowledges past problems without being defined by them. His reply was immediate and vitriolic, ending with, "You are no longer my daughter." The words were clearly meant to devastate me, to to serve as the ultimate punishment for my disobedience. 6 months earlier, they might have succeeded. I recognized them for what they were, a desperate attempt to reassert control when all other tactics had failed. I showed the message to Dr. Martinez during our next session. "How does this make you feel?" she asked gently. I considered the question carefully. "It's sad," I finally said. "Not because I've lost something valuable or relationship. It hasn't been healthy for years. But because he's still so committed to control that he'd rather disown me than consider change." That's an insightful perspective, she noted. You're grieving the relationship that could have been, rather than the dysfunctional one that was. I'm also feeling something unexpected, I admitted. Relief. Like a weight has been lifted. He's released me from even the pretense of maintaining a toxic connection. Dr. Martinez. Sometimes the people who try to punish us with their absence actually give us an unintended gift of freedom to move forward without their negative influence. That freedom manifested in unexpected ways over the following weeks. I found myself making decisions about my mood, my career, even small daily choices without the background noise of anticipating my parents' judgment or disapproval. I slept better. I laughed more easily. My friends commented on a lightness they hadn't seen in me for years. I established contact with Aunt Evelyn, beginning with a slightly awkward phone call that quickly warmed as we recognized the shared experiences that connected us despite decades of separation. She was vibrant and forthright, with a dry humor that reminded me of my grandmother. "So you finally escaped the Reyes family financial trap," she said at one point. "It took me until I was 42. You're ahead of schedule. I had advantages you didn't," I acknowledged. Support systems, professional advice, more awareness of manipulation tactics, courage, she added firmly. Don't discount that. Standing up to family mythology takes tremendous courage, especially when you've been conditioned your whole life to maintain it. As my moving date approached, I received an unexpected email from Daniel. The tone was different from our previous exchanges, less defensive, more reflective. "I've been thinking about our conversation at the coffee shop," he wrote, "about scripts and orbits and choices. I'm starting to see things I've been avoiding for a long time. Not ready to talk about it yet, but wanted you to know your actions have made me question things I've always accepted. Be well in your new job. Maybe we can talk when things settle." It wasn't an apology or a reconciliation, but it was something. New an acknowledgement that perhaps the family narrative wasn't as fixed or justified as he'd always believed. It offered a small hope that while my relationship with my parents might be irreparably damaged, my brother and I might eventually find a healthier connection. The week before my move, Tasha insisted on throwing me a farewell party. Friends from various chapters of my life gathered in her apartment, colleagues from my current job, graduate school friends who'd driven in from Michigan, neighbors from my building, even a few members of my support group who'd become genuine friends. Looking around at these people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. This was what genuine connection looked like, not perfect or without conflict, but fundamentally respectful and mutually supportive. Midway through the evening, Tasha clinked her glass for attention. "Why, want to propose a toast?" she announced. "To Alina, who taught us all something important this year, that standing up for your worth isn't selfish. It's necessary. That boundaries aren't walls, they're foundations for healthier relationships. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what hurts you, even when it's disguised as love." Her words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. The journey of the past 6 months had been painful and disorienting at times, but it had led me here to this moment of clarity and connection that wouldn't have been possible if I'd remained trapped in toxic family patterns. The moving day dawned clear and bright. As the movers loaded the last of my boxes into their truck, I took a final walk through the apartment that had witnessed so much transformation. In the empty spaces, I could almost see the ghosts of who I had been: the anxious people pleaser, desperately seeking approval, the dutiful daughter sacrificing her own needs, the woman who measured her worth by others' judgments. They were parts of me still, these previous selves, but no longer the dominant forces shaping my choices and perceptions. They had been integrated into a more complete understanding of who I was and who I was becoming. My phone rang as I was doing a final check of the kitchen cabinets. My mother's name flashed on the screen, the first direct contact since my father's disowning text. I hesitated, then answered. Alina? Her voice sounded smaller somehow, less certain than I remembered. Daniel said, "You're moving today." "Yes," I confirmed, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm starting a new position in Phoenix next week." "I see." A long pause. "Your father doesn't know I'm calling." The statement hung between us, loaded with unspoken meaning, a small act of independence. From a woman who had defined herself through my father's preferences and perspectives for decades. "I'm glad you called," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "I've been thinking about what you said, about love that depletes rather than nourishes." Another pause. Not sure I know anything about love. The admission was startling. Its vulnerability, so different from her usual, carefully maintained facade. It opened a door I hadn't expected, not to immediate reconciliation, but to the possibility that genuine change, however difficult, wasn't entirely out of reach. "I didn't either, for a long time," I said gently. "But I'm learning. Could you?" She hesitated. "Would you be willing to share what you're learning? Not now, but sometime? When you're settled." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a clear acknowledgement of the harm done. But it was a tentative step towards something different, a request for knowledge rather than resources, for connection rather than compliance. "I think I could do that," I said carefully. "Not to rebuild what was, but maybe to create something healthier, moving forward." "I'd like that," she said softly. After we hung up, I stood in the empty apartment, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Cautious. Hope mingled with protective skepticism, compassion alongside warranted caution. I didn't know if my mother's reaching out represented genuine growth, or simply a new strategy to maintain connection on altered terms. Perhaps she didn't know either. What I did know was that I now had the clarity and strength to engage with the possibility without abandoning my boundaries or compromising my well-being. Whatever came next, whether healing and transformation or continued separation, would be approached from a foundation of self-respect and clear-eyed awareness, rather than desperate need for approval. As I locked the apartment door for the final time, I thought about the journey that had begun on that Christmas morning when my father's cruel pronouncement had catalyzed a necessary awakening. The pain had been real and significant, but so was the growth that followed the reclaiming of financial autonomy, the establishing of healthy boundaries, the discovery of genuine support, the reconnection with lost family, and most importantly, the gradual rebuilding of my relationship with myself. I walked to my car, where Tasha waited to accompany me on the first leg of my journey west. The future stretched before me, not perfect or painless, but mine to shape according to my own values and vision, rather than others' expectations or demands. 6 months earlier, my father had declared I didn't deserve presents, a statement intended to diminish and control. In response, I had given myself the most valuable gift possible, the recognition of my inherent worth and the courage to live. From that truth, regardless of who could see it or acknowledge it, as we pulled away from the curb, Tasha glanced over with a smile. "Ready for the next chapter?" I looked back at the building one last time, then forward toward the open road ahead. "More than ready," I replied. "It's already being written." The highway opened before us, and with each mile marker, the weight of the past seemed to lighten. I wasn't running away from something painful. I was moving towards something promising, a life defined by authentic connections, meaningful work, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing my own value wasn't dependent on others' assessment or approval. The financial freedom I'd reclaimed by canceling that mortgage payment had been just the beginning. The true liberation came in recognizing that I was worthy of respect, of genuine love, of relationships that enriched rather than depleted me, not because of what I provided or achieved, but simply because of who I was. That recognition wasn't a destination reached in a single dramatic moment, but a path walked daily through choices large and small. Sometimes with stumbling steps, sometimes with growing confidence, but always forward toward a future I was now free to envision on my own terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.